the knife pressed cold against Clara's throat. "Drop your weapon or she dies." Ben stood in the doorway. Rifle raised, his face spattered with blood. Behind him, 40 armed men were burning everything he'd built, everything they'd fought for. "Let her go," he said quietly. His finger moved to the trigger. 3 months ago, she'd been abandoned at a train depot with 14 cents and shattered dreams. Now she was fighting for her life beside a man she'd learned to love. This is the story of how an abandoned bride and a desperate rancher built an empire from ashes. This is Iron Creek. The gunshot echoed across the Wyoming night like the crack of God's own whip. Benjamin Ward jerked his horse to a halt, every muscle in his body coiling tight as steel cable. 2 a.m, North Pasture. That meant cattle. That meant rustlers. He drove his spurs into the stallion's flanks, and the animal exploded, forward hooves pounding frozen earth. The summer of 1879 had been dry, turning the Iron Creek Ranch into a tinderbox of dead grass and desperation. Ben's breath came hard and fast, white clouds in the darkness, his right hand already reaching for the Winchester rifle in its saddle scabbard. Another shot, then 3 more in rapid succession. The staccato rhythm of thieves working fast, driving spooked cattle toward the northern property line. Ben knew that sound. He'd heard it twice before in the past 2 months. Garrett Shaw was back. The stars overhead blazed cold and indifferent as Ben crested the rise above North Pasture. Below him, chaos unfolded like a scene from the war he'd tried for 15 years to forget. 8 riders circled his cattle herd, firing pistols into the air, driving 500 head toward the gap in his fence line. The gap they'd cut. The gap they always cut. Ben didn't hesitate. He raised the Winchester and fired 3 shots in the air, the signal his cowboys knew meant all hands armed response. Then he charged down the slope, the rifle now aimed at flesh and blood instead of stars. The first rustler never saw him coming. Ben's bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle like a child's toy. The man hit the ground hard. His horse bolted. The cattle scattered in 12 directions at once, bawling their terror into the night. "Ward!" The shout came from his right. Ben turned to see Hank Cooper, his foreman, riding hard with Walt Hudson and young Danny Price behind him. Miguel Santos brought up the rear, his face grim in the moonlight. 4 men, against 8 thieves. Not good odds, but odds Ben had faced before. The rustlers saw them coming and split their forces. 4 peeled off to continue the cattle drive. 4 turned to fight. Ben recognized the tactic immediately. These weren't desperate drifters stealing a few head to eat. This was military precision. Someone had trained them. Shaw had trained them. A bullet whined past Ben's ear, so close he felt the heat. He dropped low against his horse's neck and returned fire, aiming for the muzzle flash in the darkness. The rustler's cry of pain told him he'd hit home. Not a killing shot, but enough to take the man out of the fight. Then Danny screamed. Ben whipped his head around in time to see the youngest member of his crew grab his left shoulder, blood already darkening his shirt to black. The boy stayed in his saddle, stayed in the fight, but his shooting arm hung useless. "Miguel, get him out!" Ben roared. "Hank Walt with me." What happened next lasted maybe 3 minutes, but felt like 3 hours. Ben had experienced this before during the war. Time stretching like taffy, every detail burning into memory with brutal clarity. The flash of gunpowder, the smell of cordite and fear, the way a man's face looked in that split second before a bullet found him. When the smoke cleared, 2 rustlers lay dead. 1 more had fled badly wounded. The rest had vanished into the night with 200 head of Ben's cattle, 200 animals that represented $6,000, a fortune, nearly a third of his annual profit. Ben sat his horse in the silence that followed violence, his hands shaking the way they always did after a fight. Not fear, just the body's way of bleeding off the excess energy that kept a man alive when death came calling. Around him, his cowboys checked themselves and each other for wounds. Danny had taken a bullet through the meat of his shoulder, bad but not fatal if they got him to the doctor. "Boss?" Hank rode up beside him, his weathered face creased with worry. "That's 3 raids in 2 months. Shaw's getting bolder." Ben holstered his rifle and stared at the gap in his fence line, at the churned earth where 200 cattle had been driven through like Moses parting the Red Sea, at the blood on the ground that belonged to his enemies and his friends alike. "He wants me ruined," Ben said quietly. "Wants me to fail. Wants to see everything I've built turn to dust." "Why?" Walt asked, though they all knew the answer. "Because 5 years ago I testified against him. Because I put him in prison for 3 years. Because Garrett Shaw doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget." The old man spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Revenge is a poison that kills slow." "Not slow enough," Ben replied. "Danny, can you ride?" The boy was pale as milk, but nodded, his teeth clenched against the pain. "Yes, sir, I can ride." "Miguel, take him to town. Doc Miller. Tell him I'll pay whatever it costs." "See patron." Miguel helped Danny mount, then led the wounded boy's horse toward Iron Creek town 5 miles south. Ben watched them go and felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the weight that never lifted, the weight of men depending on him, of an empire he'd built from nothing, now under siege from a man who wanted to see it burn. The sun rose 2 hours later on a scene of devastation. Ben and his remaining cowboys counted the damage by daylight, and the numbers made his jaw clench tight enough to crack teeth. 200 cattle stolen, 15 more dead or dying from gunshot wounds trampling broken legs in the stampede, 1 fence line destroyed, Danny Price wounded, possibly crippled for life if that bullet had damaged nerves, and this was just the latest attack. Ben stood in his ranch yard as the morning light turned Wyoming from black to gold, his office ledger open in his hands. The numbers didn't lie, couldn't lie. In the past 2 months, Shaw's raids had cost him $8,000 in stolen and dead livestock. The cattle drive to Cheyenne was 6 weeks away. He needed every animal he could get to make the year's profit, needed the cash to pay his 25 cowboys, buy winter feed repair equipment, expand his herd, needed to survive. "Boss," Hank's voice cut through his thoughts. "Doc Miller says Danny needs surgery. $50. Bullets lodged near the lung. $50. A month's wages for a working cowboy." Ben didn't even blink. "Pay it. He's my man. I protect my men." But that wasn't the only problem. Hank shifted his weight the way he always did when delivering bad news. "There's more. Pete's gone." Ben looked up sharply. Pete Murphy had been his cook for 2 years. Terrible cook. Burned everything. But family to Hank, which meant Ben had kept him on despite the cowboys' constant complaints. "Gone how?" "Drunk. Gambled away 3 months' wages at Shaw's saloon. Disappeared 4 days ago. Probably halfway to Montana by now." The ledger in Ben's hands suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. No cook. In ranch country, that wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a crisis. Cowboys worked 12-hour days in brutal conditions. They could tolerate bad food if it was plentiful, but no food, or worse, having to cook their own men, quit over less. "How are the boys taking it?" Ben asked, though he already knew. "They're grumbling, loud. Walt tried to make biscuits yesterday, used salt instead of sugar, tasted like eating the Wyoming territory." Hank spat. "We need a cook, boss, soon, before we lose more men than just Danny and Pete." Ben closed the ledger and stared at his ranch. 8,000 acres of the most beautiful, brutal land God ever created. 3,000 head of cattle down from the 3,200 he'd started the summer with. 25 cowboys, the best men he'd ever known. A main house with 8 rooms he mostly never used. 3 barns, corrals, a bunkhouse, a legacy 15 years in the making. All of it under threat from a man who wanted revenge more than he wanted his next breath. And now, no cook. Ben walked to his office, a room at the back of the main house that smelled of leather and old paper and the cigars he smoked when he couldn't sleep, which was most nights. He sat at the desk his father had built and opened the ledger again, this time to the expenses page. The numbers stared back at him like accusers. $50 for Danny's surgery, $6,000 lost in last night's raid alone, $8,000 total in 2 months. The next cattle drive had to succeed or he'd be borrowing against next year's profit. and if Shaw hit the drive itself on the trail to Cheyenne, Ben might lose everything. He leaned back in his chair and let his gaze drift to the corner of the office where a small portrait hung in a simple frame. Catherine, his wife, dead 7 years now, along with the son she'd died trying to give him. Her face smiled out at him from frozen time forever, 26 forever, beautiful, forever gone. "I built this for you," he said to the empty room. "Built it to last, to matter, to be something our son could inherit." He paused. "And now some bastard with a grudge is going to take it all away." The portrait didn't answer. It never did. But Ben could almost hear Catherine's voice anyway, the way she'd sounded the last time he'd seen her alive. "Don't let anyone take what's ours, Benjamin. Fight for it. Fight for us." He'd been on a cattle drive 100 miles away when she'd gone into labor. Too early. Too dangerous. He'd ridden for 36 hours straight when the news reached him. Killed 2 horses getting home. Found her already cold, the baby boy beside her, both lost because he'd chosen business over family. That guilt lived in his chest like a piece of shrapnel working its way deeper every year. Ben stood abruptly, shoving the memory back into the locked box where he kept it. No time for ghosts. Not when the living needed him. He grabbed his hat and headed for the door. "Hank," he called across the yard, "saddle 2 horses. We're going to town." Iron Creek wasn't much of a town even by Wyoming Territory standards. 1 main street, a general store, a saloon. Doc Miller's office above the barber shop. A hotel that offered questionable beds and even more questionable food. A train depot that connected the territory to the wider world twice a week. And a sheriff's office that might as well have had Garrett Shaw's name painted above the door, given how deep the corruption ran. Ben tied his horse outside the general store and headed inside to post a notice for a new cook. He was halfway through writing the advertisement when the commotion started. Shouting. A woman's voice sharp with anger. Then the station master's apologetic rumble. Ben ignored it. Not his business. He had enough problems without borrowing more. But then he heard the words that made him stop mid-sentence. "I don't care what your policy is. I was promised. He was supposed to be here. Richard Sterling was supposed to meet me at this depot, and he is not here." The voice carried the kind of controlled fury that came from someone refusing to break, despite every reason to shatter. Ben knew that tone. Had heard it from soldiers in the war, from men watching everything they loved burn, from people balanced on the knife's edge between survival and collapse. He put down his pen and walked to the depot. The woman stood on the platform like a portrait of dignity in rags. Maybe 23, maybe younger. Dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized high cheekbones and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore a brown calico dress that had been mended so many times it was more repair than original fabric. Her hands, folded precisely over a worn carpet bag, bore calluses that spoke of hard labor. But it was her spine that caught Ben's attention. Straight as a rifle barrel, despite the station master's obvious pity. Despite the 3 other mail-order brides who'd arrived on the same train, all of them now departing with their intended husbands. Despite standing alone on an empty platform with nowhere to go and no one to meet her. "Miss, I'm sorry," the station master was saying, "but we're closing. If your intended didn't show, perhaps the hotel—" "I have 14 cents, she said flatly. "The hotel costs $1 a night." The station master winced. "Then perhaps nothing." The woman lifted her chin another degree. "Richard Sterling promised to meet me, promised a home, promised marriage. So I will sit on this bench until he arrives, however long that takes." She sat, folded her hands, stared straight ahead with eyes that dared the world to make her cry. Ben had seen a lot of things in his 35 years. War, death, loss, betrayal. But he'd rarely seen courage quite so naked and unashamed as this woman sitting on a train depot bench with 14 cents and the shattered remains of hope. The station master looked at Ben helplessly. "Mr. Ward, I can't leave her here overnight. It's not safe." Ben studied the woman more carefully. Young, alone, abandoned, probably came from back east, judging by the style of her dress and the way she held herself. Factory worker if he was reading those calluses right. She'd spent everything she had on a train ticket and a dream that had turned to ash. He should walk away, had his own problems, didn't need to collect strays, especially not desperate women who'd bring nothing but complications. But then the woman's spine straightened another impossible inch, and Ben heard himself say, "Ma'am." She turned those storm-gray eyes on him, wary, defensive, ready to fight or flee depending on what he represented. "Benjamin Ward," he said. "I own Iron Creek Ranch about 5 miles north of here." She didn't respond, just waited. Smart woman. Let him show his hand before revealing hers. "My cook quit," Ben continued. "Positions open. Room board $30 a month. No obligations beyond keeping 25 cowboys fed." The wariness in her eyes sharpened to suspicion. Why would you hire a stranger off a depot platform? Fair question. Ben considered lying, decided against it. This woman would spot a lie from 100 yards. "Because desperate situations require fast decisions," he said honestly. "And because anyone who can sit that straight while their world falls apart has the grit I need." For a long moment she studied him the way a general studies a battlefield, looking for traps, for hidden costs, for the catch that always existed when something seemed too good to be true. "What's your name?" Ben asked. "Clara Hayes." 2 words, offered like a test. "Miss Hayes, I'm not offering rescue. I'm offering employment, hard work, long hours, 25 men who will judge you by your biscuits before they remember your name." He paused. "But you'll have a roof, food, safety, and wages you earn yourself." Something flickered behind those gray eyes. Not hope exactly, more like calculation, the kind of cold arithmetic that came from having nothing left to lose. "When do we leave?" she asked. They rode in silence, the wagon wheels creaking over the rutted road that connected Iron Creek town to Ben's ranch. Clara Hayes sat beside him, spine still impossibly straight, her carpetbag clutched in her lap like a shield. Ben kept his eyes on the road and his mind on the practical questions. Could she actually cook? Or had he just hired another Pete Murphy? Would the cowboys accept her? Or would they see an outsider and rebel? And most importantly, what exactly had Richard Sterling promised this woman to get her on a train from Philadelphia to Wyoming with 14 cents in her purse? "You know horses," Clara said suddenly. Not a question, an observation. Ben glanced at her, surprised. "What makes you say that?" "The way you handle the reins. Light touch. Confident. You trust them to do their job without forcing." She paused. "Most men I've known force everything." There was a story there. Ben didn't press. "Grew up with horses. My father was a rancher before the war. Taught me young." "The war," she repeated. "You fought Union Army, cavalry, 4 years." 4 years he tried not to think about. 4 years of death and mud and watching boys barely old enough to shave learn the color of their own insides. "You?" "Factory. Hamilton Textile Mills, Philadelphia. 12 hours a day at the looms." Her voice carried no self-pity, just facts. "My parents died of typhoid when I was 17. Couldn't keep the farm. Factory was the only work for women that paid enough to eat." Why answer a mail-order bride advertisement? The question hung between them like smoke. Clara didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter. "Because staying meant dying slowly. The lint in your lungs, the noise in your ears until you can't hear silence anymore. The same walls, the same machines, the same tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow until you're 40 and broken and alone." She turned to look at him directly. Leaving meant maybe living. Even if it was a lie, at least it was a different lie. Ben understood that better than he wanted to admit. Different walls, same cage. They crested a rise, and Iron Creek Ranch spread out below them like a promise carved into the earth. The main house, 2 stories of solid timber, with a wraparound porch Ben had added piece by piece over the years. The kitchen building separated for fire safety, but connected by a covered walkway. 3 barns, each one representing a year of profit and planning. Corrals that held horses worth more than most men earned in a lifetime. A bunkhouse where his cowboys slept, laughed, fought, and built the kind of brotherhood that only came from shared hardship. 15 years. Ben had built all of this in 15 years, starting with nothing but a quarter section of land and a dream so big it scared him. And Garrett Shaw wanted to burn it to the ground. Clara's sharp intake of breath pulled him back to the present. "This is yours. Every acre. 8,000 of them." Pride crept into his voice despite his best effort to sound casual. 3,000 head of cattle. 25 cowboys. It's... He stopped. What was it? His life's work. His legacy. His penance for Catherine and the son he'd never held. "It's everything," Clara finished for him. "Yes," Ben agreed quietly. "It's everything." He drove the wagon past the main house to the kitchen building. The sun was setting, painting Wyoming in shades of amber and gold that made even the rough timber look beautiful. Clara climbed down before he could offer help already, independent, already wary of owing debts. The kitchen was exactly as Ben had left it that morning, which meant it was a disaster. Flour dusted every surface like Wyoming snow. Grease caked the massive cast-iron stove until the metal looked diseased. Dishes filled the dry sink in towering, precarious stacks. Mouse droppings dotted the pantry shelves like obscene punctuation marks. Clara walked through the space with the careful precision of a general surveying a battlefield. She touched nothing, just looked, calculated, planned. "Pete Murphy was your cook?" she asked. Yes, Pete Murphy should have been shot. Despite everything, Ben felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. "He was family to my foreman. I kept him on for that reason." "Family or not, this is criminal negligence." Clara turned to face him. "I'll need supplies. Lye soap, fresh flour, salt, coffee beans not grounds, baking powder, lard. A new Dutch oven, this one's cracked. Vanilla extract if you can get it. Cinnamon, nutmeg. At least 20 pounds of sugar." Ben pulled out a small notebook and started writing. "Anything else?" "Yes, ground rules." Clara's eyes met his without flinching. "I'm accepting employment as a cook, nothing more. I need separate quarters, which I see I have. I expect the same respect you'd show any man working this ranch. No advances, no assumptions, no complications." "Agreed." "I'm serious, Mr. Ward." "So am I, Miss Hayes." Ben closed the notebook and tucked it back into his vest pocket. "My men know how to behave, or they don't stay at Iron Creek. That includes me." Something in Clara's shoulders relaxed by maybe a quarter inch. The fact that she'd been holding that much tension told Ben more about her past than any words could. "Your room's through there." He gestured to the small door at the back of the kitchen. "Breakfast is at 4:30 in the morning. Cowboys start work at 5, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Any questions?" Clara surveyed her new domain one more time. A kitchen that looked like a bomb had detonated. A job that would require 16-hour days. 25 men who would judge her by her first meal. And a ranch owner who had just offered her salvation wrapped in impossible labor. "No questions," she said. "I'll be ready." Ben left her there and walked back to the main house, his mind already spinning through tomorrow's tasks. But as he climbed the porch steps, he glanced back at the kitchen building. Light glowed warm in the windows. Through the glass he could see Clara's silhouette as she tied on an apron and began the work of transforming chaos into order. Something about that image settled in his chest, like an anchor. Then he shook his head and went inside. She was a cook, an employee. That was all. That was enough. But as he sat alone in his office later that night, the ledger opened before him, and the weight of Shaw's attacks pressing down like a physical thing, Ben found his thoughts drifting back to storm-gray eyes and a spine that refused to bend. He'd hired her to solve a problem. He had no idea he'd just invited the second most dangerous thing into his life. The first was already coming for him. Garrett Shaw. With 30 hired guns and a vendetta that ran deeper than hell. War was coming to Iron Creek Ranch, and Benjamin Ward was about to learn that sometimes survival required more than strength. Sometimes it required trusting someone else. Clara Hayes woke at 3:30 in the morning, a habit carved into her bones by 6 years of factory shifts. The room around her was dark and unfamiliar. For a disorienting moment she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. Wyoming, Iron Creek Ranch, Benjamin Ward's impossible offer, the job that might save her life or end it depending on whether she could actually cook well enough to satisfy 25 working cowboys. She dressed quickly in the dark, her fingers finding buttons and laces by long practice. The brown calico dress was her second best, which meant it had only been mended 4 times instead of 20. Her hands moved through the ritual of pinning her hair into a tight bun, each movement precise. Armor, her mother used to call it, putting on your armor for the day. Clara needed armor today. The kitchen greeted her like a slap of cold reality, worse in daylight than it had seemed last night. Pete Murphy hadn't just been a bad cook. He'd been a catastrophe with access to food. But Clara had cleaned worse. The factory housing in Philadelphia made this look almost manageable. Almost. She started with fire. The cast-iron stove was a beast easily 6 feet long and blackened with years of grease, but Clara knew stoves, knew the way they breathed, knew how to coax heat from reluctant metal. Within 20 minutes, she had flames dancing behind the grate and water heating in the big copper pot. While the water warmed, she explored the pantry. Most of what she found was garbage. Weevils in the flour, rancid lard, coffee grounds so old they'd fossilized. But in the back, hidden behind a sack of sprouting potatoes, Clara found something unexpected. A crock. Ceramic with a wooden lid and a faint yeasty smell. She opened it carefully and felt her heart lift for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. Sourdough starter. Neglected, barely alive, but clinging to existence with stubborn determination. Someone had kept this once, fed it, tended it, then abandoned it when life got hard. Clara knew exactly how that felt. "Not dead yet," she whispered to the struggling culture. "Neither of us." She fed the starter with the last of the good flour and some of the warm water, then covered it and set it aside. By morning, if she was lucky, it would have enough life to make proper bread, the kind of bread that reminded men why they kept fighting, why they kept working, why they didn't give up when everything else went to hell. 3:30 became 4. 4 became 4:30. Clara worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew failure meant starvation. She scrubbed, organized, discarded, salvaged, made lists of what she needed and what she could work with. At 4:20, she started cooking. The bacon was salvageable. Thick slabs she laid in the biggest cast-iron skillet until the fat started rendering and the kitchen filled with smells that made her stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. No time, no money, just the bone-deep exhaustion of being abandoned and afraid. But hunger could wait. Work couldn't. She cracked eggs into the bacon fat, 24 of them watching as the whites turned opaque and the yolks stayed soft. Set them aside in the warming oven. Made coffee strong enough to strip paint the way working men liked it. And then, with hands that shook slightly from nerves, Clara began making biscuits. Her mother's recipe, the one burned into memory like scripture. 2 cups flour. 4 tablespoons lard, not butter. 1 tablespoon baking powder. ½ teaspoon salt. Buttermilk until the dough just came together, no more. Handled gently like something precious. Too much kneading made them tough. Too little made them fall apart. Clara had made these biscuits 1,000 times. On the farm before her parents died. In the boarding house kitchen during her few hours off from the factory. For the other girls, the ones who'd become sisters in shared misery. But never for 25 men whose opinion would determine whether she had a job tomorrow. At precisely 5 o'clock, the first cowboy opened the kitchen door. He was old, maybe 65, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen every lie the world had to tell. He stopped dead when he saw Clara. Blinked, looked around as if expecting someone else to materialize. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'm looking for the cook." "You found her." Clara kept her voice steady. "I'm Clara Hayes. Breakfast is ready. Please sit." The old man didn't move, just stared at her like she was a ghost, or a hallucination brought on by too much bad whiskey. Then a second man entered, younger, maybe 50, with steel gray hair and the kind of shoulders that came from a lifetime of throwing hay bales. He saw Clara and his entire body went rigid. "Where's Pete?" he demanded. "Gone, I'm told." Clara met his eyes without flinching. "I was hired yesterday evening by Mr. Ward. If you have concerns about my employment, perhaps you should address them with him. In the meantime, breakfast is ready." More cowboys filtered in, drawn by the smell and the commotion. They filled the long wooden table like soldiers at mess, suspicious and wary. Clara counted them. 23 present, 2 missing, the wounded boy probably, and 1 other. She served them without comment. Biscuits piled high on platters, steam rising from their golden tops. Bacon crisp but not burned. Eggs fried perfectly in the rendered fat. Coffee black and strong and hot enough to wake the dead. The youngest cowboy reached for a biscuit first. He was maybe 19, with straw-colored hair and a bandage visible beneath his shirt collar. The wounded one. He bit down and his eyes went wide. "Sweet Mary and Joseph," he breathed. This is real food." It was like breaking a dam. The other cowboys grabbed biscuits, bit down, and the sounds they made were almost obscene. Groans of pleasure, muttered prayers of gratitude. One man actually closed his eyes like he was receiving communion. The steel-gray man, the one who'd demanded to know where Pete was, took a biscuit with obvious reluctance, bit into it, chewed slowly. His face transformed from suspicion to wonder. "How?" he asked simply. "Lard, not butter," Clara said. "Makes them flakier, and you have to handle the dough gently, like it's something precious." One by one the cowboys removed their hats, set them on the hooks by the door. It was a small gesture, but Clara understood what it meant. Respect. The kind men showed to women they considered ladies, not hired help. She'd earned something in that first bite. The man with steel-gray hair walked to where Clara stood by the stove. Up close she could see the creases around his eyes, the way his hands were scarred and calloused from decades of rope work. "Hank Cooper," he said, "foreman of this ranch. Pete Murphy was my cousin." Clara braced herself for hostility, for resentment. Instead, Hank extended his hand. "He couldn't cook worth a damn, but he was family and I kept him on for that reason. You understand?" She took his hand, shook once firm. "I understand loyalty, Mr. Cooper. I hope to earn yours through my work, not replace anyone in your affections." Something in Hank's weathered face softened. "These biscuits, my grandmother made some like these. Haven't tasted anything close in 20 years. He paused. "Welcome to Iron Creek, Miss Hayes." The door opened again, and Benjamin Ward entered, stopping short at the scene before him. His cowboys sat peacefully, eating their usual morning grumbling replaced by contented silence. The kitchen smelled like home was supposed to smell. And Clara Hayes stood at the stove already frying more eggs, as if she'd been doing this for years instead of hours. "Coffee, Mr. Ward." Clara poured without waiting for an answer, set the cup before him. "Biscuits are still warm." Ben took a bite and Clara watched his eyes close briefly. Just for a moment. The tiniest tell of pleasure quickly controlled. "Miss Hayes," he said quietly, "I believe you've worked a miracle." "Just biscuits, Mr. Ward." Clara refilled the bacon platter. "Though I found sourdough starter in the pantry. If it revives, there'll be pancakes tomorrow." A cheer went up from the cowboys. The youngest one actually applauded before catching himself embarrassed. Hank stood settling his hat back on his head. "Well, boys, we've got work. Miss Hayes, dinner at noon." "I'll ring the bell," Clara promised. The cowboys filed out, several tipping their hats to her on the way. Ben lingered sipping his coffee, watching her work with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. "The kitchen was a disaster," he said finally. "Yes." "You've already made it better than it's been in months." "It's a good kitchen." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. "Just needed attention. The bones are sound." "Yes," Ben said, looking at her rather than the room. Sometimes that's all that matters. Sound bones and someone willing to do the work. He set down his cup and headed for the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Miss Hayes, whatever you need for the kitchen, make a list. I'll send someone to town tomorrow. After he left, Clara stood alone in her domain. Dishes to wash, dinner to plan, bread to start. But first she allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. She'd passed the first test. 25 cowboys had left her kitchen fed and content. She touched the sourdough crock gently, like a talisman. Her grandmother used to say that bread was life, that feeding people was sacred work. Here in this Wyoming kitchen, 500 miles from anything she'd known, Clara began to believe she might build something from the ashes of her abandoned dreams. The morning sun streamed through clean windows, blessing her new beginning. The weeks blurred together in a rhythm of work and quiet contentment. Clara settled into the rhythm of ranch life with the ease of someone who'd been working brutal hours since before she could remember. 4:30 breakfast, noon dinner, 6 o'clock supper. 3 times a day the cowboys gathered in her kitchen and left fed content, almost happy. The grumbling stopped. More than that, the atmosphere changed. Cowboys started lingering after meals, reluctant to leave the warmth. Young Danny brought wildflowers for the table, presenting them with awkward formality that made the older hands tease him mercilessly. Even Hank thawed occasionally, sharing stories of his grandmother's Tennessee cooking while Clara kneaded bread. But it was the nights that changed everything. Clara couldn't sleep properly, her body still adjusting to Wyoming's thin air and vast silences. On the third night, unable to rest, she'd wandered to the kitchen for water and noticed something odd. The barn doors stood slightly open. Strange. Benjamin Ward was meticulous about securing buildings after dark. She pulled a shawl over her nightgown, slipped on boots, and crossed the yard. The barn held a different world at night. Moonlight filtered through high windows, casting long shadows between the stalls. The sweet smell of hay mixed with leather and the earthier scent of horses. Clara expected to find the usual occupants, the cowboys' working mounts. What she found instead made her breath catch. 3 horses stood in larger box stalls at the back of the barn. Even in dim light she could see they were suffering. A black gelding favored his right side, ugly gashes across his flank, half-healed but still raw. A bay mare stood with her weight shifted completely off her left foreleg, the joint swollen to twice its normal size. And a paint mare, ribs showing through patchy coat, stood with her head low in the universal posture of an animal that had given up hope. "Oh, you poor things," Clara breathed. The bay mare lifted her head, ears pricked forward. Clara had grown up with her father's plow horses, had learned early how to read their moods and needs. This one's eyes held pain, but not fear. She extended her hand palm flat. The mare snuffled it gently. Clara had nothing to work with in the barn itself, but the kitchen garden held what she needed. Her mother had taught her herbs, the old knowledge passed down through generations of women who couldn't afford doctors or veterinarians. She gathered comfrey for swelling, calendula for wounds, and the precious honey she'd been saving for Sunday baking. When she returned to the barn with her supplies, Clara set to work by lantern light. She'd done this before. Crushed comfrey into a poultice for the mare's swollen leg. Mixed honey with calendula for the gelding's infected wounds. The horses stood quietly, seeming to understand this was help, not harm. "What in the hell are you doing?" The voice cracked through the quiet like a whip. Clara spun around, nearly dropping the lantern. Benjamin Ward stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, clearly having expected an intruder. His shirt was hastily buttoned, feet bare in his boots. His gaze took in the scene, Clara in her nightclothes, the horses, the medicinal supplies spread on a hay bale. "I saw the doors open," Clara explained quickly. "These horses are hurt. I was just trying to help." Ben set the rifle aside, moving closer to examine her work. "You know about treating horses? My father kept plow horses. When you can't afford a veterinarian, you learn." Clara turned back to the gelding, continuing to apply the honey mixture. "This one's wounds are infected. Without treatment, he'll develop proud flesh, or worse." Ben watched her hands, gentle but sure, and something in his expression shifted. That shadow, Found him tangled in barbed wire on the eastern range last week. The paint? Lady. Bought her from a man who didn't deserve to own animals. The bay is Duchess. Yes. Came up lame after stepping in a prairie dog hole. Ben picked up a currycomb and began working on Lady's coat with practiced strokes. You're wondering why I keep them separate from the others. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. They're not working horses anymore. No. Most ranchers would put them down, or sell them for what they could get. He worked the comb through matted hair with surprising gentleness. But they gave me their best years. Seems only fair to give them peace in return. Clara looked at him with new understanding. A man who kept broken horses out of sentiment rather than profit held depths she hadn't expected. The comfrey will help with swelling, she said. I can make a stronger salve tomorrow if you have bear grease. We do. Rendered it last fall. Ben moved to Duchess, checking the poultice Clara had applied. This is already drawing the heat out. Where did you learn this? My mother. She was the closest thing to a healer in our county. People brought their animals when they couldn't afford the veterinarian from town. Clara washed her hands in the bucket. She taught me that healing is about patience and observation, not just remedies. They worked in companionable silence, Clara treating wounds while Ben groomed matted coats. Their movements synchronized naturally. When Clara reached for a bucket, Ben already had it filled with fresh water. When he needed to steady Shadow for treatment, she was there with a calming hand on the horse's neck. He's head shy, Ben warned as Clara approached Shadow's face to clean a cut near his eye. Not surprising given what he's been through. Aren't we all when we've been hurt? Clara murmured. She moved slowly, letting the gelding see her hands. She hummed softly an old lullaby her mother used for colicky babies. The horse's ears swiveled toward her. Tension eased from his muscles. Ben watched, transfixed. Most people would be afraid of an injured horse. They're unpredictable when they're in pain. Fear doesn't help anybody heal. Clara cleaned the cut with careful strokes. Trust does. They know when you mean to help. As she reached for fresh bandaging, their hands met over the supply box. Both pulled back as if burned, then returned more carefully to the task. But something had shifted in that accidental touch, an awareness that hadn't existed before. I come out most nights, Ben said quietly. Check on them, change bandages. It's peaceful here after the day's work. I could help, Clara offered, then caught herself. I mean, if you'd like. I often can't sleep right after cleaning up from supper. The walk would do me good. You've already got enough work with the kitchen. Cooking is work. Clara paused, searching for words. This is something else, something that feeds a different hunger. Ben understood. She could see it in the way he nodded slowly, accepting her offer not as obligation, but as gift. After supper, then. We'll check them together. They finished with the horses as the eastern sky began to lighten. Clara's nightgown was stained with medicines and horsehair, her hands reeking of carbolic and honey. She'd never felt more useful. You should know, Ben said as they left the barn. What you did tonight? Pete never did anything like that. He cooked badly and complained constantly, but you see what needs doing and do it, without being asked, without expecting extra pay. My mother used to say that home is where you choose to build it, not where you happen to land. Clara pulled her shawl tighter against the dawn chill. I may have come here by accident, Mr. Ward, but I'm choosing to stay by intention. Ben stopped walking, turned to face her fully in the growing light. In the barn with the horses, call me Ben. It was an intimacy as unexpected as their touching hands. First names implied friendship, perhaps more. Clara knew she should maintain professional distance, but something about the pre-dawn quiet, the shared work of healing, made pretense seem foolish. Then I'm Clara, she said simply. In the barn. Ben smiled, then the first full smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face from stern to almost boyish, revealing the man he might have been before responsibility and isolation shaped him into the reserved rancher. I'll have bear grease brought to the kitchen today, Clara. He paused at her door. And there's a veterinary manual in my office, from San Antonio. You're welcome to read it. You have books, a whole room of them. Most ranchers think I'm foolish, spending money on books instead of more cattle. But winter nights are long. Books are better company than whiskey. Clara felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. A man who read, who kept injured horses, who offered his first name like a gift. This was not the rescue she'd expected from her depot platform despair. "I should start breakfast," she said, aware of how she looked. Disheveled, medical-stained, improper. "And I should pretend I was checking fence lines if anyone asks why I'm up so early." But Ben made no move to leave. He stood in the growing light as if memorizing this moment. Finally, Clara turned toward the kitchen. At her door, she looked back. He still stood there, backlit by dawn, a solitary figure who'd just become less alone. That evening, after supper was cleared and dishes washed, Clara heard a soft knock at her kitchen door. Ben stood there, hat in hand, lantern glowing in the other. "Ready for rounds, Clara?" She picked up her shawl and the basket of medical supplies she'd prepared. Together they walked to the barn where broken horses waited for healing hands, and two lonely people began to discover that some wounds could only be mended by another's care. The paint mare nickered softly as they entered, already recognizing the sound of their footsteps, bringing comfort. And if their hands touched again while treating her, neither pulled away quite as quickly as before. October arrived with cooler mornings and golden light that painted Wyoming in shades of fire and promise. Clara had been at Iron Creek for 3 months now, and the kitchen had become more than a workplace. It had become sanctuary. The cowboys brought her pecans from their gathering expeditions, presenting them with rough formality. Ben had installed new shelves without being asked, appearing one morning with lumber and tools and refusing to discuss it beyond a brief "kitchen needed them." And Clara had established a garden plot where late vegetables grew in neat rows, a small victory against Wyoming's harsh climate. It was young Danny who mentioned his birthday accidentally. "Can't believe I'll be 20 come Thursday," he'd said during breakfast. "Old enough to drive cattle to Cheyenne next spring." The boy had colored red when Hank teased him about expecting cake, quickly clarifying he expected nothing special. But Clara saw the wistfulness in his eyes, a boy far from home, missing his mother's attention, missing being someone's son. That evening she found Ben in his office, bent over ledgers by lamplight. The door stood open, his signal that interruption was acceptable. She knocked on the frame anyway. "Clara?" He looked up and she noticed how naturally her first name came to him now, at least when they were alone. "Is everything all right? Danny's birthday is Thursday. I'd like to make something special for dinner. A cake, certainly, but maybe beef roast instead of the usual stew." Ben set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "Danny's family is in Missouri. Father died last year, which is why he hired on so young. A birthday dinner would mean a lot. I'll need supplies from town, refined sugar for the frosting, vanilla extract if they have it. Make a list. I'll ride in tomorrow." He paused, studying her. "It's kind of you to notice, to care." "He's a child, really, trying so hard to be a man." Clara smoothed her apron, a nervous habit. "Everyone deserves to be celebrated on their birthday." "When is yours?" The question caught her off guard. "February 15th. "I'll remember that." Ben said it like a promise. Clara spent Wednesday evening preparing in secret. The cake layers cooled in the pantry, wrapped in clean cloth. She'd made buttercream frosting with the precious vanilla, and Danny's name sprawled across the top in her careful script. The roast was seasoned and ready. She'd even managed decorations, paper chains cut from old Sears Roebuck catalog pages strung across the kitchen beams. Thursday dinner was announced by the bell as always. But when the cowboys entered, they stopped short. The kitchen looked festive, the table set with the good china usually reserved for Ben alone. The smell of roast beef filled the air, and in the center of the table sat the cake 3 layers tall, white as new snow. Danny stood frozen in the doorway, his young face cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and something that looked dangerously close to tears. "Someone told me it's your birthday," Clara said innocently. 20 is worth marking, don't you think?" The other cowboys pushed Danny forward, clapping his back, ruffling his hair with rough affection. Walt, the oldest, squeezed the boy's shoulder. "Nobody's done anything like this since—" Danny stopped, swallowed hard. "Since your mama," Walt finished gently. "Well, Miss Clara here seems to think you're worth the fuss. Better prove her right and eat hearty." The meal was livelier than usual. Stories flowed about everyone's worst birthday, best birthday, forgotten birthdays. Ben produced a bottle of good whiskey, pouring small measures even for Danny, just this once for toasting. When Clara brought out the cake lit with 20 candles she'd found in the pantry, the room fell silent. Danny stared at it like it might disappear. "Make a wish, son," Ben said quietly. Danny closed his eyes, blew out the candles in one breath. The cowboys cheered. After dinner, the cowboys lingered. Someone produced a guitar, and Walt played campfire songs while the younger men sang along. Clara was washing dishes when she noticed Danny standing beside her. "Miss Clara," his voice was soft, "I wanted to thank you. Nobody's treated me like family since I left Missouri." "You are family, Danny." Clara dried her hands, reached into her apron pocket. "This ranch runs on more than cattle and contracts. It runs on people caring for each other." She pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a leather journal and pencil items she'd asked Ben to pick up in town. "Every man should keep a record of his thoughts," she said. "Your adventures are just beginning, worth writing down." Danny clutched the journal like treasure, mumbled thanks, and fled before his emotions could embarrass him. Clara smiled, returning to her dishes, but she felt eyes on her. Ben stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. "Walk with me," he said. They strolled toward the corral where horses dozed in the evening cool. The barn cats wove between their feet, hoping for attention or scraps. Ben stopped at the fence boot propped on the lower rail. "My mother used to do things like that," he said finally. "Make birthdays special. Remember who needed extra kindness. She died when I was 15. After that, birthdays were just days." "Loss changes how we mark time," Clara agreed. "Makes us forget to celebrate what remains. Is that why you came west, Loss?" Clara considered how much truth to share. "Partly. My parents died within a year of each other. Typhoid. The farm went for debts. My sister married and moved to California. The factory was—" She paused. "The factory was killing me slowly. The lint in the air, the noise, the sameness. When I saw Mr. Sterling's advertisement, it seemed like escape. To marriage with a stranger. To possibility. To land and sky and work that mattered." She laughed softly, ruefully. "I was naive." "No." Ben's voice was gentle, hopeful. "There's a difference." He pulled something from his pocket, a small folded paper. "Speaking of hope, I have mail from town. This came for you." Clara recognized her sister's handwriting, tore it open eagerly, but as she read, her face fell. Margaret was pregnant, happy, worried about Clara's silence since leaving Philadelphia. The normal life Clara might have had seemed written in every line. Husband, children, settled contentment. "Bad news?" Ben asked. "No. Good news that makes me feel—" Clara paused, searching for words. "Left behind." She looked at him sharply, but found only understanding in his eyes. "Yes, I know that feeling. My brother writes from Boston, lawyer, 3 children, wife who hosts teas." Ben's smile held no humor. "He can't understand why I stay out here with the cattle and dust. Why do you—" He gestured at the darkening land, the vast sky beginning to show stars. "Because this is the only place I can breathe. Because here what you build stays built. Because—" He stopped. Started again. "I tried city life once, after the war. Lasted 6 months before I felt like I was dying from the inside out. Too many people, too much noise, too many expectations about who I should be instead of who I was." The war. Clara had wondered about his age. Mid-30s, she guessed. Old enough for that particular horror. I was 17 when I enlisted. Thought it would be adventure." His hands tightened on the fence rail. "It was education. Certainly taught me that most things people fight about don't matter. And the things that do matter, land loyalty, keeping your word. Those are worth everything." They stood quietly watching the first stars emerge. Venus shone bright in the west, the evening star her mother had taught her to wish on. Clara made a wish now, wordless, barely admitted even to herself. "I never married," Ben said suddenly, "because I never found a woman who understood this." He gestured at the ranch. The endless land. They wanted to civilize it, make it smaller, safer, change it into something that wouldn't challenge them. "Maybe you were looking in the wrong places." "Maybe." He turned to face her fully. "Clara, I need to tell you something. In town today I heard talk about you being here, about propriety. I want you to know that if it becomes uncomfortable, if you feel your reputation is suffering—" "Mr. Ward." "Ben." Clara met his eyes without flinching. "My reputation was destroyed the moment Richard Sterling failed to meet my train. I'm a discarded mail-order bride working as hired help for a bachelor rancher. The gossips have plenty to say, I'm sure." "Does it bother you?" Clara considered. "Less than starving would bother me. Less than going back to the factory would bother me. Reputation is a luxury I can't afford." "You could afford it if—" Ben stopped abruptly. "If what?" "Nothing. Forgive me, it's not my place." But Clara understood what he hadn't said. Marriage would restore her reputation. Marriage to him would make her respectable, even envied. The thought should have been calculating, practical. Instead, it sent warmth spreading through her chest. "I should check on the horses," she said, needing distance from dangerous thoughts. "I'll come with you." They tended the injured horses together as had become their habit. Duchess was healing well, barely limping now. Shadow's wounds had closed clean, leaving scars, but no infection. Lady had gained weight, her coat beginning to shine. As they worked, Ben taught Clara to read the horses' signals, how ears showed mood, how tail swishes communicated irritation or contentment, how their eyes revealed trust or fear. His hands over hers, showing her where to check for heat indicating inflammation, sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with the cool evening. When they finished, Clara turned to find a new shawl draped over the stall door. Soft wool in deep blue, far finer than anything she owned. "For the evening rounds," Ben said simply. "Nights are getting colder." Clara touched the soft wool, understood this was more than practical gift. This was courtship disguised as convenience, affection wrapped in propriety. "It's beautiful. It suits you." They stood close in the barn's dim light, the moment stretching taut between them. Then Lady nickered, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart. Walking back to the kitchen, Clara wrapped in her new shawl, she thought about possibility and second chances, about finding home in unexpected places. Behind her, Ben's footsteps matched hers, steady and sure, and she allowed herself to imagine they might walk this path together for more than just evening rounds. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October. Hank brought it from town with the regular mail, handing it to Clara with casual innocence that would haunt her later. She recognized the handwriting immediately, bold, confident strokes that had once promised her everything. Richard Sterling. Clara waited until she was alone in her room before opening it, her hands trembling slightly as she broke the seal. The familiar letterhead from the Amarillo Grand Hotel mocked her. He'd been only 50 miles away all this time. "My dearest Clara," it began. She nearly crumpled it immediately, but bitter curiosity drove her to continue. The letter was a masterwork of manipulation. Richard explained the unfortunate misunderstanding that prevented their meeting. Business matters of utmost urgency had detained him, a cattle contract that would secure their future prosperity. He'd assumed she would wait at the hotel in Iron Creek as any sensible woman would, but now he'd learned of her whereabouts, her current situation, and while he understood she may have felt abandoned, surely she must see how her present arrangement appeared to proper society. Living unmarried on a bachelor's ranch regardless of employed position created scandal. However, he was willing to overlook this indiscretion. His business affairs were now settled most favorably. He was prepared to honor their original agreement. She would come to Amarillo immediately. They would marry quietly to minimize gossip. The stage arrived Thursday. He trusted she would see the wisdom in accepting this generous offer of restoration to respectability. A woman in her position had few alternatives. Your intended husband, Richard Sterling. Clara read it twice, fury building with each word. The presumption, the condescension, the casual dismissal of her abandonment as a misunderstanding. But beneath the anger lay something colder, fear, because he was right about one thing. Her presence here did create talk. She'd heard the whispers when she went to town for supplies, felt the weight of speculative gazes. She thought of Ben, of the reputation he'd built over 15 years, the respect he commanded. How long before association with her tarnished that? How long before people began questioning his judgment, his morality? She was a scandal waiting to destroy everything he'd created. Through her window, Clara could see Ben working with horses in the corral, patient and gentle with a young colt. He'd been different lately, lighter somehow, quicker to smile. Last night he'd actually laughed at Danny's terrible joke about a cow and a preacher. The sound had been rusty but genuine, and she'd realized she'd helped put that ease back in him. Now she would have to take it away. Clara folded the letter carefully and began to plan her departure. Not to Richard Sterling. She'd sooner return to the factory than accept his generous offer, but away from here, away from Ben, before she damaged him irreparably. She had enough saved for stage fare to California. Her sister would take her in, help her find work. After midnight, when the ranch slept, Clara pulled out her carpetbag and began to pack. Each folded dress felt like goodbye. Her mother's Bible, the leather journal Danny had given her in return for his birthday gift, the book of veterinary medicine Ben had lent her. She left the blue shawl folded on her bed. It belonged here, not to whatever life waited beyond Iron Creek. The detailed recipe cards she'd been writing for her replacement took 3 hours to complete. Biscuit proportions, stew techniques, which cowboys couldn't tolerate pepper, who needed extra portions. She included notes about the horses, too. Duchess's sensitivity to cold, Shadow's tendency toward colic, Lady's love of carrots. Dawn was breaking as she penned her farewell note to Ben. Mr. Ward, thank you for your kindness these past months. I leave the kitchen well stocked and organized with instructions for whoever replaces me. Please know that my departure reflects no dissatisfaction with your employment, only recognition that my continued presence brings potential harm to your standing. The horses are responding well to treatment. Continue the comfrey poultices for another week. With gratitude, Clara. She was folding the note when the door opened. Ben stood there fully dressed, despite the early hour, his face carved from stone. Hank saw your lamp burning all night, he said. Thought something might be wrong. His eyes took in the packed carpetbag, the farewell note, the recipes lined up like accusations. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Clara straightened her spine, forcing herself to meet Ben's eyes. It's time. Because of this, he pulled out Richard Sterling's letter. She'd thrown it in the kitchen fire last night, but apparently not thoroughly enough. Charred edges remained, but the words were readable. You're going to him. No. The vehemence surprised them both. Never to him. But he's right about one thing. My presence here damages your reputation. People talk. They whisper about the abandoned bride living at your ranch. How long before they start questioning your morals? Your judgment. Clara's voice cracked slightly. You've built something good here, something respected. I won't be the reason it crumbles. So you'd run. Ben stepped fully into the room, controlled fury radiating from him. Sneak away like a thief in the night. Like someone protecting what matters. Clara gestured at the window at the ranch beyond. You gave me shelter when I had nothing. The least I can do is leave before I cost you everything. Ben crossed the room in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders. Not painfully, but firmly enough to ensure her attention. You think you're protecting me. You think I care what the gossips in town say. You should care. This ranch was killing me slowly before you came." The words erupted from him raw and unexpected. 25 cowboys to manage, 8,000 acres to oversee, and I was dying inside from the sheer loneliness of it. Clara stared at him, trembling under his hands. "The men work harder because they want to deserve the meals you make," Ben continued. "Danny's staying on through winter instead of drifting because you made him feel like he belongs somewhere. The horses are healing because you tend them with love, not just medicine." His grip gentlened thumbs brushing her arms. "You've made this ranch into something more than a business. You've made it home." "I'm a scandal waiting to happen," Clara whispered. "Richard Sterling could make trouble, spread stories." "Let him try." The ice in Ben's voice could have frozen July. "I have lawyers, influence, a reputation built over 15 years. What I don't have, what I can't replace, is you." Clara felt tears threatening. "People will say you've taken up with your hired woman, that you're keeping me for improper purposes. Then we'll make it proper." The words hung between them like gunfire. Ben seemed surprised by his own statement, but he didn't retreat from it. "Marry me? You can't mean that." "I mean it more than anything I've ever said." His hands slid down to capture hers. "Not to save your reputation or mine, not because it's practical or convenient, because the thought of you leaving feels like contemplating amputation." He struggled for words, this man who chose silence over speech most days. "When I wake up, my first thought is whether you'll smile at breakfast. When I'm working, I catch myself planning what to tell you at evening rounds, watching you with the horses, seeing your gentleness and strength." He stopped, searching her face. "I'm not good with pretty speeches. I'm a rancher who smells of horses and leather, who reads too much and talks too little. I can't promise you an easy life. Ranching is hard, uncertain. But I can promise that you'll never doubt your worth again, never be abandoned or diminished or treated as less than the remarkable woman you are." "Ben," his name came out broken. "I don't want anyone else. I want the woman who makes this ranch sing with purpose, who brings grace to everything she touches." He smiled slightly at his own wordplay. "You are what I've built here, Clara. You're the heart of it now. Without you, it's just land and cattle and ledgers." Clara looked at their joined hands, his calloused from years of work, hers marked by burns from the stove, both practical rather than pretty. Yet they fit together perfectly. "Richard Sterling can go to hell," Ben said vehemently. "If he comes near you, he'll discover what happens when someone threatens what's mine. Yours." The word should have felt like ownership. Instead, it felt like belonging. Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to build a life with if you'll have me. He released one hand to cup her face gently. "I'm not offering rescue, Clara. I'm offering partnership. Real marriage, not arrangement. Love, not convenience." The word love hung in the air like morning mist, delicate and transforming. "You love me," she whispered. "From the moment you stood up from that depot bench with your chin high and your pride intact despite everything. You were magnificent in your refusal to be broken. I've loved you through every biscuit, every evening in the barn, every smile you've given my men. I love you for seeing this place as I do, not something to change but something to nurture." Clara thought of her sister's letter, the normal life she'd never have. Then she thought of evening rounds with Ben, his hands guiding hers as they tended wounded horses. The quiet companionship that had grown into something deeper. The way home had begun to mean his smile over morning coffee. "I love you too," she admitted. The words felt like freedom. But before she could say more, a commotion erupted in the ranch yard. Shouting, the thunder of hooves, the unmistakable crack of rifle fire. Ben grabbed his Winchester and ran. Clara followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the gray dawn light she could see riders circling the main corral. 8 men heavily armed driving the remaining horses toward the open gates. At their head rode a man Clara had never seen but recognized instantly from the description Hank had given, Garrett Shaw. He sat his horse like a king surveying conquered territory. 40 years old, weathered and scarred, with eyes that held the particular madness of a man who'd nursed his hatred until it consumed everything else. He saw Ben emerge from the kitchen building and smiled, showing teeth gone yellow from tobacco. "Ward?" Shaw's voice carried across the yard. "Surprised to see me." Ben raised the Winchester in one smooth motion. "You're trespassing. Leave now or I start shooting." "Now is that any way to greet an old friend?" Shaw gestured at his men who'd successfully driven 20 horses out of the corral and were holding them in a tight bunch. "I just came to deliver a message. Personal-like." Cowboys poured out of the bunkhouse grabbing weapons. Hank, Walt, Miguel, Danny, with his shoulder still healing, and 20 others. But they were disorganized, caught sleeping. Shaw's men had the advantage of surprise and superior position. "Your message can go straight to hell along with you," Ben said. Shaw's smile widened. "You always did have a mouth on you, even when you were testifying at my trial, sending me to prison for 3 years. He leaned forward in his saddle. 3 years, Ward. You know what happens to a man in prison? What they do to you. You rustled cattle. You got caught. You went to prison. Simple mathematics." "Mathematics," Shaw spat. "I lost everything while I was locked up. My ranch, my wife ran off with another man, my reputation, all because you couldn't mind your own business. You made it my business when you stole from your neighbors." The standoff stretched taut as wire. Shaw's men had rifles trained on the bunkhouse. Ben's cowboys had weapons aimed at the intruders. One wrong move and the ranch yard would become a killing ground. Then Shaw's gaze shifted to Clara, still standing in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown and shawl. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well, well, the mail-order bride. Richard Sterling's been looking for you, sweetheart. Says you owe him a wedding." Shaw's grin turned ugly. Though from the looks of things, Ward's already been sampling the merchandise. Ben's finger moved to the trigger. "Last chance, Shaw. Ride out or die here." "I'm riding out, but not empty-handed." Shaw gestured at the stolen horses. "Consider this a toll for all the years you cost me. And Ward—" He pulled a folded paper from his vest and threw it to the ground. "That's my formal offer to buy this ranch. $20,000. You've got 30 days to accept. Otherwise, I burn it to the ground and kill everyone on it." "You're declaring war." "War," Shaw laughed. "War was declared 5 years ago when you testified against me. I'm just finishing what you started. 30 days, Ward. Then you'll wish you'd taken my generous offer." He wheeled his horse and rode out his men following with the stolen horses. 20 animals worth $6,000. Gone in minutes. Ben lowered his rifle, his face carved from stone. Around him his cowboys stood in various states of fury and shock. Only when Shaw's riders disappeared over the northern ridge did the tension break. "Boss," Hank said quietly, "that was a declaration of war." "I know. He's got 30 men at least, maybe more. We've got 25 and Danny's still healing." "I know." Walt spat tobacco juice. "We can't fight an army, son, not and win." Ben picked up the paper Shaw had thrown, scanned it quickly. "He's offering 20,000 for a ranch worth 100,000. Wants me ruined and humiliated before he finishes me." He looked at his men, these cowboys who'd become brothers. "Any man wants to leave no shame. This isn't your fight." Silence. Then Miguel stepped forward. "Mi familia es su familia, patron. I stay." "Me too," Danny said, his young voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "You didn't abandon me. I won't abandon you." Down the line every man chose to stay. Even Eddie Carson, the charming gambler who, Danny whispered, was in debt to every saloon from here to Cheyenne. He met Ben's eyes with something that looked like guilt, then nodded. "I'm in, boss." Ben's throat worked. "Then we prepare. Shaw wants war, we'll give him war. But we do it smart. Military tactics, fortifications, coordinated defense." "And the women?" Hank asked, glancing at Clara. "The women learn to shoot." 3 days of frantic preparation followed. Ben's military training emerged like a sword pulled from hiding. He'd been a cavalry officer during the war, and those skills hadn't dulled with 15 years of ranching. He organized his cowboys into defensive positions, created firing lines, stockpiled ammunition, and medical supplies. Clara found herself learning things she'd never imagined. How to load a rifle, how to sight down the barrel and squeeze, not pull the trigger, how to stay calm when bullets flew and men screamed. Ben taught her himself, patient and thorough. "You're a natural," he said, watching her put 3 shots through the center of a target at 50 yards. "Steady hands." "Factory work," Clara replied, reloading with the smooth efficiency he'd drilled into her. "You learn not to shake." The moment of connection between them crackled like electricity. Ben trusted her with deadly skill, trusted her to fight beside his men if it came to that. But even as they prepared for Shaw's inevitable attack, another threat was riding toward Iron Creek Ranch. Richard Sterling stepped off the Thursday stage with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. He was handsome in the way of carnival hucksters and snake oil salesmen, all polished surface with nothing underneath. 35 years old, dressed in a city suit that cost more than most cowboys earned in 6 months, he carried himself like minor royalty visiting the provinces. He hired a buggy from the livery and drove north following directions to Iron Creek Ranch. Young Danny spotted him first. "Miss Clara, there's a man at the gate, city fellow, says he's come for you." Clara's hands, busy kneading bread, went still. Through the kitchen window she could see the buggy, the man climbing down, and even from 100 yards away she recognized him. Richard Sterling had found her. Ben appeared from the barn, moving with the predatory grace of a man ready for violence. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip. He'd been on edge since Shaw's ultimatum, sleeping in his clothes weapon, always within reach. "Can I help you?" Ben's voice carried across the yard, polite but cold. Richard approached with his hat in hand, the picture of civilized manners. "Benjamin Ward, I presume Richard Sterling. I've come to collect my intended bride." The cowboys gathered, drawn by the commotion. Clara walked out slowly, drying her hands on her apron. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her spine straight. "Mr. Sterling," she said flatly, "you're 3 months late." Richard's smile was practiced oil. "My deepest apologies, Clara. Business matters detained me in Amarillo, a cattle contract that required my immediate attention. I assumed you would wait at the hotel as any sensible woman would." "You assumed wrong." "So I see." Richard's gaze traveled around the ranch, taking in the fortifications, the armed cowboys, the woman in an apron who should have been his wife. "I understand you've found employment here. Admirable resourcefulness. But surely you realize your current situation is untenable. A young woman living unmarried on a bachelor's ranch. The scandal is none of your concern," Ben interrupted. "Miss Hayes is under my protection." "Protection?" Richard's eyebrows rose. "An interesting choice of words. I wonder what the good people of Iron Creek Town would call it." He reached into his vest and pulled out a leather portfolio. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately, or perhaps in front of witnesses, so there's no confusion." He extracted a document, unfolded it with theatrical precision. "I have here a marriage certificate properly executed and filed with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Clara Hayes and Richard Sterling married by proxy on July 10, 1879. The blood drained from Clara's face. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Richard's smile turned sharp. "You signed documents before leaving Philadelphia. Powers of attorney, travel permissions. Perhaps you didn't read them as carefully as you should have." Clara's mind raced back. There had been papers. Richard had sent them, said they were necessary for her travel arrangements. She'd signed them, trusting, desperate, already dreaming of her new life. "Pennsylvania law permits proxy marriage when one party is unable to attend the ceremony in person," Richard continued smoothly. "I had business that prevented my traveling to Philadelphia, so I arranged for our marriage to be conducted by proxy, completely legal, completely binding." He held out the certificate. Ben snatched it, studying the document with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Clara saw his jaw clench. "This is a forgery," Ben said. Prove it. Richard's confidence never wavered. The signature is Clara's. The seal is from the Philadelphia County Clerk. The witnesses are registered citizens. Everything is in order. I never married you, Clara said, her voice shaking with fury rather than fear. I never consented to any proxy marriage. Those papers were supposed to be travel documents. Your memory seems conveniently faulty. Richard pulled out more papers, letters, in Clara's handwriting. Here you write about your eagerness to become my wife. Here you discuss our future together. Here you express gratitude for my generosity in arranging your passage. Each letter was real. Clara had written them full of hope and naive trust. Now they were being twisted into weapons against her. Those prove nothing, Ben said. A man can claim anything with a forged certificate and some love letters. Can he? Richard's smile turned predatory. Then perhaps we should let a judge decide. I'm prepared to file suit in territorial court. Force Clara to return with me to fulfill her legal obligations. Unless, he paused, unless you're prepared to compensate me for the considerable expense I've incurred, train tickets, hotel accommodations, the emotional distress of being abandoned at the altar. How much? Ben's voice was flat. $500. A fortune. 6 months' profit for most ranchers. Richard knew exactly what he was doing. Either get the money or drag Clara and Ben through a public trial that would destroy both their reputations. You're a con artist, Clara said. A fraud who tricks women into traveling west, then extorts money from them or the men who help them. Prove it. Richard spread his hands. I have documentation, legal papers. What do you have? The word of an abandoned mail-order bride living in sin. Hank stepped forward, hand on his pistol. You should leave, now, while you still can. Is that a threat? Richard looked around at the gathered cowboys, all armed, all furious. But instead of fear, he showed triumph. 20 witnesses just heard you threaten me. I wonder how the territorial marshal would view that, especially after I file my lawsuit. He turned back to Ben. $500 ward, or I drag both of you through court and destroy what's left of your reputations. You have until Sunday to decide. Richard climbed back into his buggy and drove away, leaving Clara shaking with impotent rage and Ben calculating odds and options with the cold precision of a general facing impossible terrain. That night, as Clara stood alone in the kitchen trying to work through her fury by kneading bread with violent efficiency, she heard a knock at the door. Ben entered without waiting for permission. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper. The weight of Shaw's ultimatum and Sterling's blackmail pressing down like physical force. $500 is nothing, he said without preamble. I'll pay it. Get rid of him. End this. No. Clara slammed the dough onto the table. He doesn't get to win, doesn't get to profit from his lies. Then we fight him in court. I'll hire the best lawyer in Wyoming Territory. We'll prove the certificate is forged. And in the meantime, Clara's voice cracked. The trial takes months. Every day people hear about the abandoned bride and the rancher who took her in. Every day your reputation suffers. Shaw uses the scandal to turn people against you. Your buyers, your business partners, your neighbors. She turned to face him fully. Richard Sterling is a snake, but he's a smart snake. He's found the one way to hurt you that you can't fight with guns or lawyers. He's weaponizing my past against your future. Ben crossed the room, taking her flour-dusted hands in his. Then we give him nothing to weaponize. We marry, today, tomorrow, before he can file his fraudulent lawsuit. Once you're my wife, his claim becomes meaningless. That's not how I wanted this, Clara whispered. Not forced by blackmail, not to solve a problem. It's not just to solve a problem. Ben's thumb traced circles on her palm. I asked you to marry me this morning because I love you. Sterling showing up doesn't change that. It just makes the timeline more urgent. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to say yes, let him solve this with the direct action he brought to every problem. But doubt wormed through her chest like poison. How do I know you won't regret this? Regret me when the dust settles and you're tied to a woman who brought you nothing but scandal and trouble. You're not trouble. You're the best thing that ever happened to this ranch. To me. Ben. A crash from outside cut her off. Gunfire. Shouting. Clara and Ben ran to the window in time to see the northern pasture explode in chaos. Fire. At least a dozen riders circling the hay barn throwing torches. Shaw's men were back, and this time they'd come to burn. The hay barn went up like kindling flames leaping 50 feet into the night sky. Inside were 200 tons of winter feed, the difference between Ben's cattle surviving until spring or starving to death, insurance against Wyoming's brutal cold, fuel for the coming months, all of it burning. Ben's cowboys poured out of the bunkhouse firing at the retreating riders, but Shaw's men had the advantage of darkness and surprise. They vanished into the night, leaving behind destruction and a message written in smoke and fire. This wasn't a raid. This was a promise. Ben stood watching his winter feed burn his face, illuminated by the orange glow. Clara saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not even fury. Something colder, more dangerous. Calculation. "Hank," he said quietly, "how much hay did we lose?" "All of it, boss. 200 tons. Maybe $8,000 worth." "Miguel, how many cattle can we winter without that feed?" "Half, maybe, if the winter's mild." Miguel's accent thickened with stress. "If it's hard patron, we lose everything." Ben nodded slowly. "Then we sell. Half the herd. Tomorrow, before Shaw can hit us again." "Boss, that's letting him win," Walt protested. "No, that's survival." Ben's voice carried the weight of command the officer he'd been during the war. "Shaw wants me ruined and desperate. Wants me to make stupid decisions out of pride. Instead, we do the smart thing. Sell half the herd now while we can still get decent prices. Use that money to buy feed from neighboring ranches, shore up our defenses, hire more men if we need them." He turned to face his cowboys, all of them soot-stained and weary. "Shaw thinks he's broken me. He's wrong. You don't survive 15 years building a ranch in Wyoming territory without learning how to take a punch and keep fighting." Clara watched him rally his men, turn disaster into strategy, and felt something fierce and proud burning in her chest. This man wouldn't bend, wouldn't break, would find a way forward even when the path looked impossible. This was the man she loved. But as the hay barn collapsed in on itself, sending sparks shooting into the night sky like dying stars, another rider approached the ranch. A woman on a tired horse leading a pack mule, her face exhausted but determined. She rode into the firelight and Clara's heart stopped. "Margaret," she whispered. Her sister slid from the saddle, 8 months pregnant and swaying with fatigue. Behind her a man dismounted more carefully, older, prosperous-looking, with the soft hands of a merchant. "Clara." Margaret's voice carried the mix of relief and reproach only a sister could achieve. "Thank God. When I got your letter about the situation here, Philip and I came as fast as we could." Clara hadn't written any letter. But before she could say so, Margaret was embracing her pregnancy, making the hug awkward but fierce. "You're coming back to Sacramento with us," Margaret said. "Tonight if possible. Tomorrow at the latest. This is madness, gunfights and fires and scandal. I won't let you stay in this nightmare." Over her sister's shoulder, Clara met Ben's eyes across the burning ruins of his hay barn, and realized that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with guns. Sometimes they were fought with the people who loved you most. The kitchen became a battlefield of a different kind. Margaret sat at the table, her pregnancy making her movements careful and deliberate. Philip, her husband, stood by the stove with the awkward stance of a man who knew he'd been dragged into family drama beyond his control. Ben leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, silent but present, and Clara stood at the center, feeling pulled in 12 directions at once. "I don't understand," Margaret said for the 3rd time. "You wrote that you needed help, that the situation had become dangerous, that Richard Sterling was making trouble and this rancher was—" She gestured at Ben. "I don't even know what you said about him." "I didn't write any letter," Clara repeated. "Margaret, I haven't written you in 6 weeks." The sisters stared at each other. Then understanding dawned simultaneously. "Richard," they said together. "He must have forged it," Clara continued. "Sent it to you in Sacramento to create more pressure, more chaos, make me desperate enough to accept his offer." "That's—" Margaret's face flushed with anger. "That's unconscionable. Philip, can we prosecute him for this? Philip, a mild-mannered Sacramento merchant who'd clearly not bargained for Western drama when he married Margaret, adjusted his spectacles nervously. Possibly, if we can prove forgery. Though given the current situation—" He trailed off. Margaret's anger shifted direction. "The current situation being that you're living unmarried with a strange man on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, apparently in the middle of some kind of range war." "It's not like that," Clara protested. "Then what is it like? Because from where I'm standing it looks exactly like that." Ben spoke for the first time. "Miss Hayes is my employee. She works as cook. She has separate quarters. There's been no impropriety." Margaret's gaze traveled over him, assessing, taking in the gun at his hip, the soot on his clothes from fighting the fire, the way he positioned himself between Clara and potential threats out of pure instinct. "You love her," Margaret said flatly. Ben didn't flinch. "Yes, ma'am, I do." "And you, Clara?" Margaret turned to her sister. "Do you love him?" Clara met Ben's eyes, saw the question there, the vulnerability he tried to hide behind that stern exterior. "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Margaret absorbed this, her hand unconsciously rubbing her pregnant belly. "Then why aren't you married already?" "Because I asked her this morning and we were interrupted by a raid and a fire and your arrival," Ben said dryly. "It's been a complicated day." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile. Trust Ben to reduce 3 months of building tension to a complicated day. But Margaret wasn't smiling. "Clara, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. I know what it's like to fall for a man who seems romantic and adventurous. I almost ran away with someone completely unsuitable before I met Philip." "I remember," Clara said. "Father forbade it. And I hated him for it at the time. But now," Margaret gestured at Philip, at the life they'd built, "I'm grateful. Because what seemed like grand passion at 17 would have been misery at 25. Philip is steady, reliable. Our life in Sacramento is good." She leaned forward. "Come back with us, not because I don't think you love Mr. Ward, I can see you do, but because love isn't enough when you're living in a war zone, when your name is being dragged through the mud by a con artist, when the man you love has enemies who burn his property and threaten his life." "She's right." The voice came from the doorway. Ben pushed himself upright, his face unreadable. "Your sister is right, Clara. You should go to Sacramento." Clara felt the world tilt. "What?" "I was selfish this morning. Asking you to marry me when you're caught between Sterling's blackmail and Shaw's violence. Asking you to tie yourself to a man with a target on his back." He looked at Margaret. "Your sister is offering you safety, family, a future without bullets and fires. You should take it." "You're rescinding your proposal." Clara's voice came out small. "I'm setting you free to choose without pressure." Ben's jaw worked. "You came here by accident, stayed by necessity. Now you have another option, a better one. You should take it." He turned and walked out before Clara could respond, the door closing behind him with terrible finality. Margaret reached for Clara's hand. "He loves you enough to let you go. That's a good man, Clara. But good men die in range wars. They lose their ranches to enemies and their reputations to scandal. Is that the life you want?" Clara stared at the closed door. Beyond it, she could hear the ranch settling into an uneasy night. Cowboys on guard duty, the crackle of dying fire, the restless movement of spooked cattle. This place had become home in 3 short months. These people had become family, but Margaret's words echoed in her head. "Love isn't enough when you're living in a war zone." Was it? 3 days passed in terrible limbo. Ben threw himself into work with manic intensity, organizing the cattle sale, supervising the construction of new defensive positions, drilling his cowboys in coordinated defense. He was polite to Clara, but distant, professional. as if the intimacy of their barn rounds had never existed. Margaret and Philip stayed at the hotel in town, but visited daily. Margaret's pregnancy making travel difficult, but her determination unshakable. She painted pictures of Sacramento, the house they'd built, the business opportunities for women, the church community, the schools where Clara could teach if she wanted. A normal life, the kind Clara had thought she wanted when she first answered Richard Sterling's advertisement. But every morning when she made biscuits, Clara thought of the cowboys' faces lighting up. Every evening when she checked on the injured horses alone now, since Ben had stopped coming to rounds, she thought of his hands over hers, teaching her to heal. Every night when she lay alone in her small room, she thought of the proposal he'd offered and then withdrawn. "I'm setting you free to choose without pressure." But the lack of pressure felt worse than any ultimatum, because now the choice was truly hers, and she had no idea what the right answer was. On Sunday morning, Richard Sterling appeared at the ranch again. This time he brought the territorial marshal, a weary-looking man in his 50s who clearly wished he was anywhere else. "Mr. Ward," the marshal said apologetically, "Mr. Sterling has filed a complaint, claims you're harboring his wife against her will." "She's not his wife," Ben said flatly. "I have documentation," Sterling began, "that we've already determined is fraudulent," Ben interrupted. He pulled out papers of his own. "I telegraphed Philadelphia. The county clerk has no record of any proxy marriage for Clara Hayes. The seal on Sterling's certificate is a forgery." Sterling's confidence flickered, just for a moment, but he rallied quickly. "Clerical error, or corruption. I have other evidence. You have lies." Ben stepped closer, and even the marshal shifted nervously. "Here's what's going to happen, Sterling. You're going to get back on the next stage to Amarillo. You're going to forget Clara Hayes exists. And if you ever come near her again, if you ever speak her name in public again, I will destroy you." "That's a threat." "Marshal, you heard." "I heard Mr. Ward promise to use legal means to protect someone under his care," the marshal said tiredly. "Which is his right. Mr. Sterling, unless you have better evidence than a suspected forged document, I suggest you take his advice." Sterling's face flushed red. "This isn't over. I'll file suit in federal court. I'll drag both of you through." Ben's fist connected with Sterling's jaw before anyone could react. The con artist dropped like a felled tree, blood streaming from his nose. "Sorry, Marshal," Ben said mildly. "My hand slipped." The marshal looked at Sterling sprawled in the dirt, then at Ben, then at the 25 armed cowboys who'd gathered to watch. "I didn't see anything. Must have been looking elsewhere. Mr. Sterling, I suggest you leave Iron Creek, today, before more hands slip." Sterling stumbled to his feet, cupping his bloody nose. "You'll regret this," he snarled at Clara. "Both of you. You deserve each other. A failed bride and a failing rancher. I give you 6 months before Shaw burns you out completely." He limped to his buggy and drove away, leaving a trail of blood spots in the dust. The marshal tipped his hat to Clara. "Miss Hayes, for what it's worth, I've seen Sterling's type before. You had a lucky escape." He glanced at Ben. "Try not to hit anyone else, Ward, even if they deserve it." Margaret stepped forward, her pregnant belly making her movements awkward, but her voice sharp with fury. "Marshal, I have evidence of another crime." She pulled the forged letter from her bag. "This man forged a letter in my sister's name and sent it to me in Sacramento to manipulate me into traveling here. Mail fraud is a federal offense." The marshal's expression darkened as he examined the letter. "You're right, Mrs." He looked at Philip. "Hayes. Philip Hayes." Philip adjusted his spectacles. "And we're prepared to testify." The marshal turned to Sterling, who'd gone from red to white. "Mail fraud carries a sentence of up to 5 years in federal prison, Sterling. This just got a whole lot worse for you." Sterling's bravado crumbled. He'd thought he could walk away with just a warning and a bloody nose. Now he faced years behind bars. After he left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the ranch. Ben's knuckles were split and bleeding. Clara wanted to tend them the way she would have a week ago, but the distance between them felt unbridgeable now. "I should pack," she said quietly. Ben's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn around. "Stage leaves Tuesday morning. I'll have Hank drive you to town." "Ben." It's the right choice, Clara. Your sister is right. I'm right. You deserve better than this. He walked away before she could argue, leaving Clara standing alone in the yard where Richard Sterling's blood was already soaking into Wyoming dirt. That night Clara couldn't sleep. She wandered the kitchen, touching surfaces she'd cleaned and organized. The stove she'd learned to love despite its temperamental damper. The shelves Ben had installed without being asked. The window that looked out over the ranch she'd helped transform from workplace to home. At midnight she made a decision. She put on her boots and shawl and walked to the main house, knocked on Ben's office door. When there was no answer, she pushed it open anyway. Ben sat at his desk, ledger open but ignored, a bottle of whiskey beside him untouched. He looked up when she entered, and the naked pain in his eyes almost made her falter. "I'm not going to Sacramento," Clara said. "Clara, let me finish." She closed the door behind her. "Margaret is offering me safety, family, a conventional life, and a week ago that would have been enough. A week ago I thought those were the only things that mattered." She moved closer. "But you taught me something, Ben Ward. You taught me that safety without purpose is just another kind of prison. That family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when things get hard. And that conventional isn't the same as right. Shaw will keep attacking. Sterling might come back. The whole town is talking about us." "Let them talk." Clara's voice strengthened. "I didn't leave Philadelphia and cross 1,000 miles to play it safe. I left because I was dying slowly in that factory, because I wanted a life that mattered, work that meant something, people worth fighting for." She laid her hands on his desk, leaning forward. "You said this morning that you were setting me free to choose. Well, I'm choosing. I'm choosing this ranch, these cowboys, these broken horses we heal together. I'm choosing the life we're building, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard. And if we lose, if Shaw burns us out, if we end up with nothing, then we'll have nothing together." Clara met his eyes without flinching. "But I'd rather have nothing with you than everything without you." Ben stood slowly, moving around the desk. "You're sure? Because once you make this choice, there's no going back. I won't let you leave again. Won't survive you leaving again." "I'm sure." He kissed her. Then finally, after 3 months of restraint and longing, it wasn't gentle, it was desperate and fierce and tasted like promises too big for words. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We'll marry tomorrow," Ben said. "Before Shaw, before Sterling, before anyone else can try to take you away from me." "Tomorrow," Clara agreed. But as she walked back to the kitchen, still feeling the heat of his kiss on her lips, she didn't see the figure watching from the shadows of the barn. Eddie Carson stood with his hands clenched into fists, guilt eating him alive. He'd just returned from town, from meeting with Shaw's man again, from selling information about the ranch's defenses, the cattle sale Ben's plans, from betraying the only family he'd ever known, because gambling debts didn't forgive themselves, and Shaw's money was the only thing keeping Eddie's creditors from breaking his legs. But watching Clara and Ben together, seeing the love they'd fought so hard for, Eddie felt something crack inside his chest. Tomorrow Shaw was planning the final attack, the one that would break Iron Creek Ranch forever, and Eddie had just given him everything he needed to make it succeed. He looked at the folded bills in his pocket. Blood money. Judas Silver. And for the first time in his miserable, self-serving life, Eddie Carson decided to do something brave, even if it killed him. Dawn broke over Iron Creek Ranch with the kind of crystalline clarity that made Wyoming beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Clara stood in the kitchen, hands deep in bread dough, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and blood. Today, she would marry Benjamin Ward. Today, she would choose her future with full knowledge of its costs. The kitchen door burst open. Eddie Carson stumbled inside, his face pale as milk, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his hat. "Miss Clara," his voice cracked, "I need to see the boss, now, before it's too late." Something in his eyes, wild with fear and shame, made Clara's stomach clench. "What's wrong?" "Everything." Eddie swayed on his feet. "Everything's wrong and it's my fault. Please, I need to tell him before it happens. Clara wiped her hands and ran to find Ben. He was in the barn with Hank and Miguel checking weapons and ammunition one more time. The defensive preparations had become routine, a grim acceptance that Shaw's next attack was a question of when, not if. "Ben, Eddie needs to speak with you. Something's wrong." The urgency in her voice brought all three men running. They found Eddie collapsed in a kitchen chair, head in his hands, the picture of a man facing his own execution. "Talk," Ben said flatly. Eddie looked up, tears streaming down his face. Not the charming gambler anymore, just a broken man confessing his sins. "I've been feeding information to Shaw. For 2 months now. Every raid, every attack, they knew exactly where to hit because I told them." The words tumbled out in a rush. "The North Pasture cattle, the hay barn, your defensive positions, the cattle sale, all of it. I sold you out for gambling debts." The silence that followed was absolute. Ben's hand moved to his pistol. Hank's face went red with fury. Miguel crossed himself and whispered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer for the damned. "How much?" Ben's voice was dead calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. $500, over 2 months. 50 here, 100 there." Eddie couldn't meet their eyes. "My debts were 300. I thought I'd pay them off and stop. But Shaw kept asking for more, kept paying, and I kept taking the money because I'm weak and stupid and a coward. You know what we do to traitors." Hank's hand was on his gun now. "Yeah." Eddie's voice steadied slightly, acceptance of consequences lending him dignity he hadn't earned. "I know, and I deserve it. But before you shoot me, you need to know what's happening today." Ben grabbed Eddie by the shirt front, hauling him upright. "Speak, now." "Shaw's attacking at noon, during your wedding. He knows you planned it for today because I told him. Knows you'll have your guard down thinking about the ceremony instead of defense. He's bringing 40 men, not just to raid, to finish you. Burn the ranch, kill everyone who resists, drive you out permanently." The words hit like physical blows. Ben released Eddie, who slumped back into the chair. "He's hitting the South Pasture first. Draw your men there. Then the main force comes from the north straight for the house and bunkhouse. He wants you watching your cattle get stolen while he burns your home." Miguel was already moving. "I'll gather the men. Reorganize our positions." "Wait." Ben's mind was racing, visible in the way his eyes unfocused slightly. The cavalry officer emerging from beneath the rancher. "If we know Shaw's plan, we can turn it against him. He expects us to react predictably. We won't." He turned to Eddie. "You're going to ride to town. Tell Sheriff Davis what's about to happen. Tell him Shaw is planning mass murder and arson. I know Davis is corrupt, but even he won't ignore 40 armed men attacking a ranch in broad daylight. Too many witnesses." "Boss Davis works for Shaw," Hank protested. "But the territorial marshal doesn't, and he's in town, remember, stayed for Sterling's complaint." Ben smiled, cold and calculating. "Eddie, you're going to confess everything to the marshal. Give him legal cause to intervene. Then you're going to get on the next stage out of Wyoming and never come back." Eddie stared. "You're not going to kill me. You just saved 25 lives by warning us. That earns you one chance to run. But if I ever see you again, Eddie Carson, I will put a bullet in you myself. Clear." "Clear." Eddie stood on shaking legs. "Boss, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. Sorry is what you tell yourself when you're riding away. Now go. You've got 2 hours before noon." Eddie ran. The next 90 minutes passed in controlled chaos. Ben gathered his cowboys and laid out the situation with military precision. Shaw expected them to defend the South Pasture. Instead, they'd abandon it. Let Shaw's diversion force steal whatever cattle they wanted. Meanwhile, Ben would position his men in concealed locations around the house and bunkhouse. When Shaw's main force arrived expecting minimal resistance, they'd ride into a crossfire. "It's a gamble," Ben acknowledged. "We lose cattle either way. But if we break Shaw's main attack kill or capture enough of his men, we break his operation. He can't keep raiding if he doesn't have the manpower." Walt spat tobacco juice. "And if the marshal doesn't come, Then we hold as long as we can and pray." Ben looked around at his men, these cowboys who'd become brothers. "I won't lie to you. Some of us might die today. Shaw's bringing 40 guns. We're 25, but we have something he doesn't." "What's that?" young Danny asked. "We're fighting for our home. Shaw's fighting for revenge. That makes us more dangerous." Miguel nodded slowly. "The man protecting his family fights harder than the man collecting wages." "Exactly. So here's what we do." Ben sketched out positions in the dirt. Rifle teams on the barn roof, scattered defenders behind water troughs in the smithy behind the woodpile, overlapping fields of fire, no bunching up. If one position got overrun, the others could provide covering fire for retreat, and Clara would be in the root cellar beneath the kitchen with a rifle and ammunition in case everything went to hell. "No," Clara crossed her arms, "I'm not hiding while you fight. You're not trained for this. I hit targets at 50 yards. You taught me yourself." Her jaw set in the stubborn line Ben had come to know well. "I won't cower in a cellar while the men I love are fighting for their lives." Ben wanted to argue, wanted to order her to safety, but looking at her face he knew it would be useless. And honestly, another rifle might make the difference between survival and slaughter. "You stay by the kitchen, cover the approach from the east. If they get past our forward positions, you slow them down so we can adjust." Agreed. Margaret arrived at 11 o'clock, her buggy clattering into the ranch yard. She climbed down with difficulty, her pregnant belly making movement awkward, and stopped dead when she saw the preparations. Cowboys checking weapons, defensive positions being fortified, the unmistakable air of men preparing for battle. "What's happening?" she demanded. Clara explained quickly. Shaw's planned attack, Eddie's confession, the trap they were setting. Margaret's face cycled through shock, horror, and fury in rapid succession. Then she grabbed Clara's arm. "Get in the buggy, now. Philip's at the hotel. We're leaving. You're not staying for this." "Yes, I am." "Clara, this is insane. 40 men are coming to kill everyone here. You'll die." "Maybe." Clara gently removed her sister's hand. "But I'd rather die defending what I love than live safely regretting that I ran." "That's not romantic, it's stupid. You can't stop 40 armed men with stubbornness and love." "No, but 25 good men with rifles and a defensive plan might." Clara pulled her sister into a hug. "Go back to town, Maggie. Take Philip and get somewhere safe. If this goes wrong, tell everyone what happened here. Tell them Garrett Shaw murdered innocent people over a grudge." Margaret was crying now. "You're throwing your life away for a man you've known 3 months. I'm choosing my life, finally, after 23 years of having it chosen for me." Clara squeezed tighter. "I love you, but I'm staying." Philip had appeared drawn by his wife's tears. He took in the situation with one long look and made the decision of a practical man. "Margaret, we're going, now, before we're caught in the crossfire." He helped his pregnant wife back into the buggy. Margaret looked back one last time, her face streaked with tears. "I'll never forgive you if you die, Clara Hayes." "Then I'd better not die." Clara tried to smile, failed. "Take care of your baby. Name her something strong." The buggy rolled away. Clara watched until it disappeared, then turned to find Ben watching her. "You could have gone," he said quietly. "So could you. This is my ranch. It's my home." Clara picked up the rifle he'd given her, checked the chamber like he'd taught her. "Besides, someone has to make sure you don't do anything stupid and heroic." Despite everything, Ben laughed. Then he pulled her close armor and weapons and fear between them and kissed her like it might be the last time. "When this is over," he murmured against her hair, "we're getting married, even if we have to do it in a burned-out barn with a traveling preacher. Deal." At 11:45, Hank spotted the dust cloud to the south, Shaw's diversion force right on schedule. 20 riders driving hard toward the south pasture where Ben's remaining cattle grazed. Ben let them come, watched through a spyglass as they scattered his herd, started driving the animals north toward Shaw's territory. 200 head, $6,000 on the hoof. He let them go, because at 11:55 a second dust cloud appeared to the north. larger, moving faster. Shaw's main force 40 strong coming to burn Iron Creek Ranch to the ground, while Ben's men were supposedly distracted by the cattle raid. Garrett Shaw rode at the head of his small army, a Confederate cavalry saber strapped to his saddle. Theatrical. Stupid. Exactly the kind of thing a man nursing a 5-year grudge would do. They came in hard and loud, whooping like this was a game, firing pistols in the air, expecting minimal resistance, planning to sweep through the ranch like a wildfire through dry grass. They rode straight into hell. Ben's hidden riflemen opened fire from 6 positions simultaneously. The coordinated volley dropped 8 men in the first 3 seconds. Shaw's cavalry charge disintegrated into chaos as horses screamed and riders dove for cover. "Reload, maintain fire," Ben's voice carried across the ranch yard, calm and authoritative. The voice of a man who'd done this before. "Don't waste ammunition. Pick your targets." The cowboys obeyed with the discipline Ben had drilled into them. Aimed shots, not panicked spraying. Each bullet carefully placed to maximum effect. Shaw's men returned fire, but they were exposed and disorganized. Ben's defenders were dug in behind solid cover. The tactical advantage was overwhelming. Then Shaw rallied his troops. The man was many things, but coward wasn't one of them. He'd survived 3 years in prison by being meaner and smarter than everyone around him. He wasn't going to lose to a rancher, even one who'd been a cavalry officer. "Spread out, flank them. Flank. Burn everything." Shaw's voice cut through the gunfire. $10 bonus to the man who kills Ward." His men surged forward in 3 groups, one toward the barn, one toward the bunkhouse, one straight at the main house where they thought Ben was directing the defense. That's when Clara opened fire. She'd positioned herself at the kitchen window with perfect sight lines to the eastern approach. When 6 of Shaw's men came charging toward the house, she picked the leader and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped. His companions scattered, searching for the threat. Clara worked the lever action, chambered another round, fired again. Second man down. Now they knew where she was. Bullets punched through the kitchen wall, shattering glass, sending splinters flying. Clara ducked low, counted to 3, popped up in a different window, and fired twice more. She'd learned more than shooting from Ben. She'd learned to move, to think, to be unpredictable. But there were 6 of them, and one of her, and they were spreading out to surround the kitchen. Clara fired her last round, then grabbed the second rifle she'd prepared. No time to reload. Just keep fighting. Keep them away from Ben's flank. One of Shaw's men kicked open the kitchen door. Clara swung the rifle like a club, catching him across the jaw. He went down hard. She grabbed his pistol and shot the man behind him. Then strong hands seized her from behind. She was dragged backward, a knife appearing at her throat. "Drop it or she dies," her captor shouted. Ben appeared in the doorway, rifle raised. His face was spattered with blood, not all of it his own. Behind him, the ranch yard was a scene of carnage and chaos. "Let her go, Jenkins," Ben said calmly. "You don't want to die today." "Neither does she. Drop your weapon or I cut her throat." The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats. Then a gunshot cracked from an unexpected angle. Jenkins' head snapped back. He collapsed, the knife clattering harmlessly away. Danny Price stood in the doorway, his rifle still smoking, his face white but determined. "Nobody threatens Miss Clara." Ben nodded once. "Good shot, son." Then he was pulling Clara to her feet, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No. You—" "I'll live." He handed her a loaded pistol. "Stay close. This isn't over." The battle had been raging for 20 minutes when the sound that changed everything echoed across the ranch. A bugle. The clear, precise notes of cavalry recall. The territorial marshal rode in with 12 deputized men, all armed, all prepared to restore order by force if necessary. Behind them came the Iron Creek town sheriff, looking like he wished he was anywhere else. "Cease fire! All of you cease fire!" The marshal's voice boomed. "By authority of the Wyoming Territory, I'm ordering all combatants to lay down weapons. Now!" Slowly the gunfire stuttered to silence. Shaw's men, those still standing, looked at each other in confusion. Some dropped their weapons immediately. Others hesitated until they saw their companions surrendering. Garrett Shaw sat his horse in the middle of the ranch yard, surrounded by the dead and wounded of his failed attack. His cavalry saber hung useless at his side. His face was twisted with rage and disbelief. "This isn't legal," he shouted at the marshal. "Ward started this. He's been harassing my men for months." "That's a lie," the marshal said wearily. "I have a signed confession from Eddie Carson detailing your entire operation. The raids, the extortion, the planned assault on this ranch. You're under arrest, Shaw. You and every man who rode with you today." Shaw's hand moved toward his pistol. Ben's rifle came up in one fluid motion. "Don't." For a long moment Shaw considered it. Death by combat instead of hanging. A glorious end to match his inflated sense of drama. Then he saw Clara standing beside Ben, rifle in hand, very much alive despite his best efforts to destroy her and everything she loved. Saw the ranch still standing. Saw his grand revenge reduced to failure and humiliation. He lowered his hand. Let the marshal's deputies take his weapons. Let them put him in irons like a common criminal. "You haven't won," Shaw said as they led him away. "You've lost half your cattle, your hay barn, your reputation. This ranch is finished." "No." Ben's voice was steady. "This ranch survived, and survival is winning." Shaw was dragged away, still snarling threats. His men were rounded up, the dead were counted, and the brutal arithmetic of violence was tallied. 12 of Shaw's men dead, 15 wounded, 8 captured unhurt. The rest had fled when the marshal arrived. On Ben's side, 3 cowboys wounded, none seriously. Miracle didn't begin to cover it. The marshal approached Ben, his expression grim. "Eddie Carson's confession covers everything. Shaw will hang for this. But Ward, you need to understand. This kind of violence, even in self-defense, it brings attention. Federal attention. Questions about how the territory is being governed. Shaw brought the violence. We just survived it." "I know, and my report will say exactly that. But—" The marshal looked around at the bullet-scarred buildings, the blood soaking into Wyoming dirt. "Maybe consider moving, starting over somewhere less complicated." Ben followed his gaze, saw his ranch damaged but standing, saw his men wounded but alive, saw Clara covered in plaster dust and gunpowder residue, looking more beautiful than anything he'd ever seen. "No," he said simply. "This is home." The marshal tipped his hat. "Then I wish you luck. You're going to need it." After the law departed, taking Shaw and his surviving men to face justice, an exhausted quiet settled over Iron Creek Ranch. Cowboys moved through the yard, tending wounded, repairing damage, processing what they'd just survived. Ben found Clara in the kitchen, methodically cleaning up the shattered glass and splintered wood. Her hands were shaking slightly, delayed reaction to violence and fear, but her face was calm. "You fought well," he said. "I was terrified." "So was I." Ben took the broom from her hands. "But we survived. Together." Clara looked around the damaged kitchen, her sanctuary violated by bullets and blood. Then she looked at Ben, alive and whole despite the odds. "We were supposed to get married today," she said. "Still can, if you want." "In a shot-up kitchen with half the dishes broken?" "In a shot-up kitchen with half the dishes broken," Ben confirmed. "I'll get the traveling preacher from town. The men can serve as witnesses. We'll have the wedding right here, right now, before anything else can go wrong." Clara started to laugh, couldn't stop. The sound had an edge of hysteria, but also genuine joy. "That's the most romantic proposal I've ever heard." "It's the only proposal you've ever heard from me?" "True." She sobered, took his hands. "Yes, today, right now, before the universe gets any more ideas about interrupting us." The wedding took place at sunset. The traveling preacher, roused from an early supper, arrived to find a ranch that looked like a battlefield and a bride in a dress borrowed from the only woman in 50 miles who matched her size. Mrs. Davis, the sheriff's wife, pressed into service by her guilty husband. The cowboys gathered, still wearing their gun belts, still carrying the smell of powder smoke. They'd cleaned up as best they could, but this wasn't a formal affair. This was survival celebrated, love claimed in the midst of chaos. Judge Morrison, who'd stayed in town for Shaw's arrest, agreed to officiate. He stood before Ben and Clara with his law book open and his expression solemn. "Dearly beloved," he began, then stopped. "Actually, given what you folks have been through today, I'm going to skip the formal parts. Ben Ward, do you take Clara Hayes as your wife to stand with in good times and bad, in peace and war, for as long as you both live?" "I do," Ben said. His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "Clara Hayes, do you take Ben Ward as your husband for better or worse, richer or poorer in health and sickness, until death parts you?" "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me by Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Ben, kiss your bride before something else goes wrong." Ben pulled Clara close and kissed her as the sun set over their battle-scarred ranch. The cowboys cheered. Someone fired a gun in the air in celebration, then stopped when Hank yelled that they'd had enough shooting for one day. Clara broke the kiss, laughing and crying simultaneously. "We did it." "We survived," Ben corrected. "Now comes the hard part." "What's harder than today?" "Building a life together, raising cattle, maybe raising children if we're blessed, growing old on this land." He touched her face gently. "That takes more courage than fighting off raiders." "Then it's good we're doing it together." That night, Ben carried Clara over the threshold of the main house into the bedroom he'd prepared while she'd been cleaning the kitchen. He'd opened all the windows, letting Wyoming air sweep through the space, moved Catherine's portrait to the attic with love and respect, making room for the future without dishonoring the past. "It's not much," he said. "It's everything." They made love, slowly learning each other, healing each other from the day's violence with gentleness and passion. And when Clara fell asleep in Ben's arms, she dreamed not of gunfire, but of children laughing and horses running and bread rising in the kitchen of a home built to last. 5 years later, Clara stood on the porch of Iron Creek Ranch, her hands resting on her swollen belly. 8 months pregnant with their third child, watching her husband teach their daughter to ride. Elizabeth Ward, 4 years old, sat atop Shadow, the once injured black gelding, now gentle as a lamb. Ben walked beside them, his hand on his daughter's leg, steady and patient. Their son Matthew, 2 years old, toddled after them shouting, "Me too, Papa, me too." The ranch had grown. After Shaw's conviction and hanging his land had been seized and auctioned. Ben bought it, expanding Iron Creek to 15,000 acres, the largest ranch in the county. They ran 5,000 head of cattle, now employed 40 cowboys, and supplied beef to 3 states. But more than size, the ranch had become something else. A haven. When word spread about Clara's story about the mail-order bride who'd found love and fought for it, other abandoned women started appearing. Some seeking work, some seeking refuge, some just needing to know that survival was possible. Clara hired them, taught them, made Iron Creek Ranch into a place where women could rebuild their lives without shame or judgment. The territorial newspaper had written about them, the love story of Iron Creek. But they'd missed the deeper truth. This wasn't just about romance. It was about 2 broken people choosing to heal together, about building family from strangers, about creating home from nothing but will and work and love. "Mama, watch," Elizabeth called. "I'm riding all by myself." Ben had released his steadying hand, letting their daughter ride alone for the first time. The pride on his face was almost painful to see. Clara touched the sourdough crock on the porch railing, the same starter she'd revived her first night at Iron Creek. Still alive, still rising, still feeding the family that had grown around it. Movement caught her eye. A wagon approaching on the road from town. As it drew closer, Clara recognized the driver. Margaret, no longer pregnant, but holding a baby girl in her arms. Philip beside her, looking more comfortable in Wyoming than he had 5 years ago. "Clara," Margaret called. "We came for Sunday dinner like we promised." The sisters had reconciled slowly. Margaret had apologized for trying to make Clara leave. Clara had apologized for the terror she'd put her sister through. Now they saw each other monthly, their children growing up cousins, despite the miles between Sacramento and Wyoming. Ben rode up with Elizabeth, lifted their daughter down with easy strength. "Margaret, Philip, welcome. Clara made enough food to feed an army. She always does, Philip said warmly. He'd grown to love Ben like a brother over the years. That evening the main house filled with people. The original cowboys, those who'd survived the battle with Shaw. Hank Cooper, now 70, sat in the place of honor with his new wife Emma, the widow he'd courted for 3 years before finally proposing. Walt Hudson had passed 2 winters ago, buried on the hill overlooking the ranch he'd loved. Miguel Santos. Miguel Santos and his wife Rosa, their 4 children now grown with families of their own, filled 2 entire tables. Neighbors from surrounding ranches. The ranch hands who worked Iron Creek's expanded operation. It was Danny Price, now 25, and foreman after Hank's retirement, who proposed the toast. 5 years ago, Danny said, standing with his glass raised, this ranch was under siege. We were losing cattle, losing hope, losing ourselves. Then Miss Clara arrived at the depot abandoned and alone, and Mr. Ben did the bravest thing a man can do. He offered her a chance. He looked around the room. They taught us something that day. That family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays when things get hard, who fights beside you when the world comes calling. Here's to Iron Creek Ranch, to the people who built it, to the love that saved it, and to the legacy we're all part of. To Iron Creek, the room chorused. Clara caught Ben's eye across the crowd. He smiled, and in that smile she saw everything they'd survived, everything they'd built, everything still to come. After dinner, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Ben and Clara walked to the barn for evening rounds. It had become ritual, these quiet moments, checking on horses and talking about the day. Lady, now too old for riding, nuzzled Clara's hand looking for treats. Shadow stood nearby, retired but dignified. Duchess had passed the previous winter peacefully in her sleep, earning tears from every cowboy on the ranch. "Do you ever regret it?" Ben asked. "Choosing this life?" Clara looked around the barn, at the horses they'd saved, at the ranch they'd defended, at the family they'd built from nothing. "Regret?" She laughed softly. "Ben, I regret every day I wasted being afraid, every year I spent in that factory instead of living. But choosing you, choosing this." She took his hand, placed it on her pregnant belly, where their 3rd child kicked strong and sure. "This is the only choice I've never regretted." Ben pulled her close as her belly allowed. "Richard Sterling's abandonment was the greatest gift he ever gave you. And Garrett Shaw's attack taught me that some things are worth fighting for." Clara rested her head against his chest. "We built something here. Not just a ranch. A place where people can come broken and leave whole. Where love isn't just romance, it's choosing each other every day despite the cost. That sounds like something that should be written down." "Maybe someday," Clara smiled. "When we're too old to live it, we can write it." They stood together in the barn's golden light, 2 people who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other by design. Outside Wyoming night settled over their land, vast and starlit and full of promises kept. The mail-order bride and the lonely rancher, the abandoned woman and the broken widower. They'd become something more than their pasts. They'd become partners, parents, pioneers of a different kind of frontier, one measured not in acres conquered, but in hearts healed. And if you rode past Iron Creek Ranch on a quiet evening, you'd see it still stands. The main house expanded to accommodate 3 generations, the barns rebuilt stronger, the corrals filled with horses, some broken, all healing. You'd see smoke rising from the kitchen chimney, where Clara still makes those biscuits that brought 25 cowboys to their knees. You'd see Ben teaching his grandchildren to ride the same way he taught his children, with patience and love, and the certain knowledge that what you build with care lasts longer than what you take by force. And if you listen carefully, you might hear the story they tell around the fire on cold nights. The story of how love found its way to a woman with 14 cents and a man with everything but happiness. How they built an empire from ashes. How they proved that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in drawing your gun. Sometimes it's in opening your heart and choosing every single day to stay.